Tormented Souls is a dark survival horror game that is as far from a light-hearted experience as you can imagine. Inhospitable environments, terrifying and morbid enemies, and a story that is the opposite of My Little Pony. In other words, this game is permeated by pure evil. But the question is whether this is an entertaining game. In this review, I discuss basic aspects of the game and how it's experienced on the Nintendo Switch. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, I review new games every week. I received a review copy of this game, and with that said, let's check out Tormented Souls. This is not a new game, it was released already in 2021, but now we get the opportunity to play this game on Nintendo Switch. This story is about Caroline, who investigates the disappearance of a pair of twins. Unfortunately, a mysterious accident occurs that makes her unconscious. She wakes up naked in a bathtub that may be the most disgusting bathtub I have ever seen. In addition, she is connected to a respirator. So what's really going on here? You will often find different books that tell what happened to different people. You also meet some NPCs who guide you or explain why things are the way they are. The story is heavy and gloomy to say the least. What Caroline discovers along the way is not exactly a sunshine story. Well, I don't want to spoil, but the story is dramatic. It's perfectly okay. In Tormented Souls, you go around and investigate, read different documents and find useful objects, and something that makes the game much easier to navigate, namely maps. You usually move in narrow corridors and it's easy to get lost. But when you find the maps, which are scattered throughout the game, you get an overview of where you are. Without the maps, the experience would have been confusing indeed. The house you run around in has many floors, and it actually took a while before I recognized the environments, where I have been and where different rooms lead. It's also very dark. You usually run around with your lighter to see, but sometimes you can light up some rooms. This feels like a nice relief from running around with limited visibility. It's a game that requires you to examine every single surface. This is due to all the puzzles that are often solved by finding objects that are applied in, for example, doors or human bodies. It can happen that the game becomes long-winded, that you run around and search without finding what you're looking for. But it's also one of the game's points, to investigate and explore. However, there are some puzzles that are really entertaining and that contribute to a varied gameplay. Some can actually be quite cryptic and difficult to solve. This may, for example, mean that you have to visit different parts of the house, interact with different objects, and change the time to be able to move on. Yes, sometimes you find portals. These work as time machines. They are a form of puzzle where you have to solve a task in one world for something new to happen in the ordinary world. It's quite an interesting concept to travel between different times to solve problems or puzzles. I find some puzzles challenging, which means that you have to test different ideas and think through what needs to be done. That's a good aspect of this game. It's entertaining. The combat is, in my opinion, one of the weaker aspects of the game. The enemies you most often encounter consist of acid spitters, wheel monsters, slashers, and wall monsters. On the Nintendo Switch, you use ZL for auto-aiming and ZR for shooting. Unfortunately, I think the combat is clumsy. This is because it feels like you have reduced control over what is going on. It's especially frustrating when fighting acid spitters. Their ranged attack is hard to avoid, at least I had a problem with that. Therefore, it's necessary to learn how the weapons work, how much beating the enemy can withstand, and which weapon is most effective depending on the situation. But a shotgun is quite fun to use. The enemies die quickly and the risk of being injured yourself decreases. I also think that Caroline is quite difficult to move once you are in combat. It doesn't feel so responsive. It's possible to make a backward jump by pressing ZR and Y, but it may require that you have plenty of space. If you're pressed against a wall at the same time as an enemy attacks, then there is a risk of injury and your health pool is limited. If you're hit a couple of times, you die. I noticed that I was burning through my medical assets, which made me try a different tactic, namely to take detours around the enemy. It worked quite well, but how fun is it really? If you have been injured and lack medical equipment, you end up in a problematic situation. In order for the game to seem as realistic as possible, you lose a lot of speed if you're dying. Here I am close to death and now run around at reduced speed. I can't say that it is particularly fun because you move a lot, but I guess this indicates that you have to be careful, beware of getting injured, make sure that you have enough medicine so you can heal, What is significant about survival horror games is that you have to manage your resources. This also applies to this game. You find ammunition everywhere, but that doesn't mean that you can shoot non-stop. Without access to weapon, you only have your crowbar available, a weapon that is used in melee range and that automatically exposes one to danger. Most enemy attacks are melee based. This means that if you run around and fight with your crowbar, you have to pay attention to the enemy's swings. Difficult, but can work if you practice and get used to melee combat. But yes, you have to be frugal and not waste all your ammunition. I really liked the graphics in this game. Of course, you can't ask that the game should look as good as it probably does on PlayStation, but I think the developers succeeded well in creating an eerie world that looks perfectly okay on the Nintendo Switch. All detailed environments are especially good. Each room are decorated with furniture and objects. They are usually messy, filthy and disgusting, which creates a nice whole. It's a really creepy and inhospitable house. Definitely a place you don't want to be in unless you're crazy, but fits perfectly in a survival horror game. There are also shadows that look slightly pixelated, but in general it doesn't bother me. It gives more depth and life to the environments. However, the camera is fixed. You can't control it yourself. It usually works quite well, and it's not something that I perceived as annoying. Sure, in some situations, for example in fights, I wish I had a better perspective, so you could determine the distance to the enemy, but overall it works well. Tormented Souls is a game that gives a mixed impression, but for the most part works very well on the Nintendo Switch. The game's strengths are definitely different puzzles that I find challenging and sometimes require patience. The graphics are also perfectly okay. The game developers have really captured the perfect terrifying feeling needed in a survival horror game. In addition, I experienced that the game flows well. No major issues with lack of frame rates. It's a good version created for Nintendo Switch. However, there was one problem that was really problematic. The game has no autosave function, nor can you choose to save whenever you want. You actually only have a limited number of savings. This means that if the game crashes, which happened 5 to 6 times during my playthrough, then you have to be prepared to redo a lot. This is a problem that I hope the game developers solve. Unfortunately, I also think the combat feels stiff and quite awkward actually. On several occasions I wanted to avoid fighting, mostly because it felt clumsy and the risk of me being injured. But as a whole, this is a challenging and fun survival horror game. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. I review new games every week. Have a great day. See you.